Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host from NDIS Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today's guest speaker is James Loveday from Empowered Liveability. James, welcome.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you mate.
Good.
Thank you for putting aside some time to talk to our listeners and myself about what you guys do as the largest SDA provider in Victoria. We're always keen to find out more about what makes you guys, any business, different in the market. And I'm very excited to have you on board to talk to us about your organisation and your team and your point of difference and what stands out for you guys. So James, take it away, mate.
So obviously I work for Empowered Liveability. It's not my company. I am just the business manager. So I run it in theory. So what kind of makes our company different is we've been in the SDA space for over 5 years. We were one of the first SDA providers in Victoria to put houses on the ground. At the moment, we manage over 50 SDA homes within Victoria, and we also have houses across other parts of Australia. Primarily high physical support needs, improved livability and fully accessible homes. We'd also do a little bit of robust housing, but our robust housing model is slightly different to other providers in the space. One of the things that makes our company slightly different to others is that the majority of our staff have actually come from a disability background. We have 3 staff members within our organisation that have a disability. 2 of them are on the NDIS. And in comparison to other SDA companies which come from a property background, we more come from a people management background, either coming from direct supports or management of disability, mental health or youth organisations. So we started a couple of years ago because one of our directors was supporting a participant in an aged care facility, heard about SDA and kind of went, this guy probably needs a better place to live other than an aged care facility. So she went out and sourced the first SDA home for Empowered Liveability. And, just over 5 years on, we are the largest SDA provider of homes within Victoria, at 50 operational homes at the moment. And obviously, we've been a bit of a trailblazer within the SDA space within Victoria. So that's a little bit about us.
So with 50 in Victoria, how many more around Australia do you have?
We've also got some homes we've got 10 homes in Brisbane. We've got 1 home in Western Australia, and we're currently working on projects in South Australia, some projects in New South Wales, looking at a project in far north Queensland, and looking at some projects in Tasmania on top of the existing homes and the existing locations that we have.
Oh, wonderful. So all up, how many staff in the organisation at the moment?
10. We're a pretty streamlined organisation. We have a big belief in if you employ the right people to do the right job, you get the right outcome. So we try to run a non-bureaucratic company in theory. Having a streamlined staff means that if someone has a problem with something, they can pretty much talk to the right person straight away instead of it having to go through a chain of command. So only 10 of us across Australia, but we're 10 strong.
Yeah, wonderful. So James, your background was Townsville, I believe. You came from Townsville yourself and had a bit of a disability experience in other organisations up there. Is that right?
Yeah. So bit of my background, I actually started when I was very, very young. I didn't learn to read or write till I was 12 or 13 years old. So I spent quite a bit of time in special needs units in education, in the education sector as a child. Once I went to high school, I had a teacher that realised that I was probably a bit more brighter than what people were seeing me as. So I had a bit of lived experience in, literally spending the majority of my school years with special needs students and children with a disability. Then in probably the age of 15, I started my first ever job in the disability field, supporting a lovely young lady, well, young, she's twice my age, with cerebral palsy, around her access to artistic spaces within North Queensland. From there, I've worked in Townsville, I've worked in Melbourne, I've worked in Perth, I've worked in central and remote the Northern Territory with people with disabilities. So everything from kind of your high physical supports through to the majority of my work was in the kind of robust and mental health space as a direct supports provider, and also worked a lot in engaging with kind of fringe migrant and ethnic groups in communities to build kind of culturally appropriate supports.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Well, that's a great background to have, working within this wonderful organisation, being in Victoria. Now, I want to ask you, Victoria seems a little bit, I don't know, a little bit of a challenge for some people to understand, in comparison to New South Wales and Queensland, where a lot of the investment and the investors have been going into with the construction development for SDA. Yeah. Victoria is a bit of a different scenario. When I talk to other providers in Queensland about Victoria, they always give me a bit of a confused look with how things go down in Victoria. Do you find there's a bit of a difference in the way providers operate and the participants roll out compared to other states? Is there a bit of a difference, or you find it exactly the same?
Seeing from Victoria, I actually think, from my perspective, that Queensland and New South Wales is harder. But I think what that has to do is that the majority of people I speak to with a disability or service providers that I deal with, they kind of want to deal with a person on the ground in that state. So quite often when you have organisations coming from other states, so like when we went from Victoria to Brisbane, it was a bit harder for us because we don't have our full team there. And with a lot of SDA companies being based in New South Wales and in Queensland, Southeast Queensland, I think some of the problem with it coming into the Victoria space is actually having a man on the ground or a woman on the ground or a person on the ground, in theory. Yes. Because even though we think that every state's the same, every state has very slight differences. Like when I came from North Queensland, where I was doing the NDIS as a part of the NDIS rollout prior to moving to Victoria, I had lots of interaction with First Nations people and people from the Torres Strait Islands, people from Papua New Guinea, and there was little groups of Italians and Greeks and stuff like that in Townsville. When I've come to Victoria, I've had to learn a totally different culture and a totally different way that culture approaches people with disabilities. So down here, when you're dealing with, you might be dealing with a participant that's Muslim, you might be dealing with a participant that's, from a Sudanese background where their family have come from a war-torn country, you might be dealing with a participant from a Greek family or an Italian family or a Serbian family. They all have very different approaches to how culturally they approach disabilities. So when you're looking at helping these people find their forever home, you really need someone on the ground that understands the culture and can also have those conversations face to face and can also be readily accessible. Quite often, when people have a question, the best thing to do is to catch up with them, have a cup of tea and answer it. Sometimes things can be lost over a phone call or over a Zoom. I think a lot of people with disabilities and their families are looking for that interpersonal connection with a service provider. So I think that when people have this blank look on their face when they're from a state outside of Victoria, about Victoria, it's probably because they don't understand that even though we're all Australia, every state and every culture is different.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, with the rollout of your products in Victoria, I noticed you mentioned to me in the past, another Zoom call with me, one-on-one, you said the model of Empowered Liveability has been build it and they will come kind of product rollout, which is quite different from the mentality of other providers and groups around Australia.
Yep.
Can you explain to us why that is the case and how the model of your organisation is different from others?
So when I say, being one of the first providers in Victoria, so the market when Empowered Liveability started is vastly different to the SDA market now. So when Empowered Liveability first started, nobody knew what SDA was. From an investor's perspective, no one knew what SDA was. No one was talking about SDA. No one knew how it worked. So we had to build, and they would come, as in build the homes with the understanding that we knew we could find the participants post the house being built in those areas. Yes. Over time, you've seen that the whole market has changed. We've now got massive developers. We've got builders all coming into the market and building for. So they're still doing build and they will come, as in they're building the home and hoping the participants come. But from our perspective, we're no longer building those homes. We're no longer contracting those builds unless they're very specialty builds within the market. We're now looking to the broader market of builders and property developers, and then acquiring their properties based on the participants' needs within that area. So
Gotcha.
What kind of makes our company kind of has a three-way strategy to SDA homes. We have acquisitions from other builders, developers, other SDA providers sometimes as well that weren't able to tenant the home. Quite often they're out-of-state SDA providers that have had the problems that we might have mentioned earlier. We have our second, which is we believe that some SDA homes really need to be built for purpose. So we're doing quite a large project at the moment around building bariatric SDA housing. We see we've got quite a strong tie with some hospitals that have quite a few bariatric participants that are needing SDA housing. And the reason they're still stuck in hospital is because a high physical needs SDA house is not custom built to someone that is bariatric. And then the third way we have is we work a lot with family members and with people with a disability to own their own SDA home. So they've come to us. They might, one of the ladies we've worked with has cerebral palsy. She had a fall and is now in a wheelchair. Prior to that, her and her husband both worked. They have two beautiful children. And while she was in hospital, she was kind of told that the house that they already own wasn't fit for her to move back to. So she needed to look at this SDA option. So what we've worked with her on is how do we design an SDA home that's for a family where the cost of the modifications to make it to that level of SDA, and we're building from scratch. It's not a pre-existing modified home. How do we make that work for the family, make that financially viable within their kind of borrowing capacity and their equity capacity? So there are kind of three different models. So acquiring properties from the larger market, building or contracting properties for very specialty markets, and then working with either people with a disability or their families that wish to own an SDA home for a family member or a loved one.
Yeah, that stands out, that service of looking after owner-occupier participants.
And it's a very different market because
it is,
it's a lot harder market to work in because there is a lot of barriers within lending towards people with a disability, and we've really tried to work with lenders as well to help explain what that looks like.
Bank of Australia used to be part of that process, but they've pulled out. Do you know any other lenders who are still okay with lending to owner-occupier participants?
To tell you the truth, we just have brokers that we work with and send them to, because I know that a lot of the big four banks now have kind of executive managers at a national level that have the word SDA in their job title. That doesn't mean that the kind of branch manager lender understands what that means. But I believe that it's more around a lot of specialist lenders, but I also believe that it's a really, for people with a disability to be able to do it, it's very much about having quite a big amount of equity or quite a big amount of down payment originally, because of the property shortfalls.
Exactly. Let's move on from that. There's a very important topic I want to talk to you about, which I've been talking about non-stop since you and I spoke about this 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And that is fire sprinklers.
Fire sprinklers, yes.
Class 3 fire sprinklers. You mentioned to me back then that there was a get-together back in November or December 22 of a whole bunch of CEOs regarding NDIS and SDA, and the topic of fire sprinklers was their discussion, and you and I spoke about it.
Yep.
Can you tell me about your thoughts and feedbacks about this topic and the rollout of the potential mandate that's coming in soon, which eventually will come to the SDA market? I don't know when. What are your thoughts on this topic, please?
I think from talking to people with disabilities, this is something that they want. It is so at the moment, fire sprinklers are not mandatory in all SDA homes. And so it's a bit of choice from the owner if they put them in there. When I know lots of SIL providers and service providers that will not offer services in SDA homes if they do not have sprinklers, or the appropriate kind of fire systems. But also from talking with a lot of people with disabilities and their families, they're quite concerned. On an overnight shift where a worker might be sleeping, you've got 3 people with high physical support needs, all needing hoisting to get out of the house, to get into their wheelchair to get out of the house. Those fire sprinklers can very much mean the difference between life and death. If you've got one person trying to evacuate 3 people, it's quite scary for the families and quite scary for the person with a disability, because where are they in that line of who's going to be first out of the house? So I think it lowers the anxiety level of people with a disability. It also lowers the anxiety level of the families. It also lowers the anxiety level of and kind of the risk factors around SIL providers. I am all for SDA housing having sprinklers. At the moment, all the homes that we manage have sprinklers. We have had a strong belief in sprinkler systems being implemented in homes right from the kind of start of Empowered Liveability.
So all 50 houses in Victoria have fire sprinklers?
Every single house that we manage has fire sprinklers in it, even if it's an improved livability.
Wow. I think you are probably the only organisation to be able to say that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. We might be. I know other organisations out there that have the same approach as us, probably don't have the same number of houses on the ground. And in a lot of people in the improved livability space, they don't really see the need for it. But the thing about improved livability is the idea of SDA is to promote independence. And in promoting independence, sometimes you can up risk. So by promoting independence in an improved livability space where there's more chance of the participant, cooking their own meals, using electrical devices and stuff like that, you actually have more risk of fire in the home, because you're allowing more people to access the risk, in theory.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
So
okay, that's a good point.
So in my work with when I worked with high phys participants in the past, most of the time I prepared the food as a support worker. But when I worked with someone that was in either a straight SIL or so equal to a kind of improved livability home, my job is more to help facilitate them in the home. So facilitate them cooking. But if I'm one worker with 3 people, someone's cooking, someone needs help outside, in theory, when I leave that kitchen, I'm leaving a quite risky situation in relation to burns, in relation to fire, in relation to that kind of stuff. So I see it as it's actually a little bit more high risk because the people are preparing their own meals, which kind of gives a bit more chance for a fire to happen than if a support worker's doing it.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
What about robust, James? What are your thoughts on, can you explain to me why your portfolio at Empowered Liveability doesn't have any robust homes? You said earlier today that on the podcast here that HBS, FA and IL is the primary focus of your organisation.
It's the primary. So though high-vis, IL and fully accessible are the primary focus, a lot because our company didn't have an understanding of robust, to tell you the truth. One of our directors has an understanding of it, has worked in the space, but not in the residential space of participants that would need robust. And as I come from that background, we're looking at transitioning into that space. But one of the reasons Empowered Liveability never went into the space is we have a really big belief in robust housing really needs to be very, very specific to the individual participant's needs. So a lot of robust houses we see are built to the SDA standard, but sometimes have a little lack of understanding around the individual participant's needs. So we see a lot of robust houses that are built with the way the house is designed is quite restrictive because they might have bathrooms, kitchens blocked off, or they've got secondary doors built into them. But the participant might be living in the home not because they're a absconding risk or because they're a property damage risk. They might be living in the home because they need extra soundproofing because noise really affects them. So it might be about designing a home which is very, very well insulated and soundproof for that individual participant. We quite often also see homes in the broader market where it might be a 2-participant home with an OLA and a breakout room, but the 2 participants are positioned directly next to each other in the house, which means if one of them might have autism and be quite vocal, and the other one might actually get behaviours from that noise. So not having a buffer between them that's sufficient could lead to more property damage or other risks within the home, more restrictive practices having to be implemented. And we like to look at robust from the least restrictive way possible. One of the other things we see, which is a little bit hard, is a lot of new robust housing is built into brand new estates, and the kind of covenants over brand new estates doesn't allow front fences. A lot of participants, they need a front fence. It's stated by their behavioural practitioners that that's something they need. They want to be able to access the front yard, but they need some form of physical barrier. And if the estate doesn't allow that, it's very hard for that participant to access their yard. We see things like where houses are built into estates and they're kind of built the same kind of dimensions as a normal home in that estate. So there's very little distance between the SDA home and the next door neighbours. When you build robust, you have to think about where this home is and how this home is also going to interact with the broader street, the broader community. So in a lot of new estates where these homes are built, new estates are primarily where young families live, where young families move to. And if you've got a participant that is in their backyard on a trampoline, could be quite vocal, it can be quite disruptive to the next door neighbours. So quite often those kind of factors aren't thought about. So the robust homes that we have worked on, and all of them have been where a family member has is owning the home, so we can really customize how that home looks for the individual participant. They're all the things we're thinking about. We're thinking about, why does this participant need a robust home? Do they need a robust home because they do property damage? Do they need a robust home because a part of their communication sometimes is to push and try to lead a support worker in a physical way, not in an aggressive way, but in a physical way? Do they need it because their lighting needs to be set to a certain way? Do they need it so that when they can't, they might have a problem with seeing people walk up and down the street? So positioning them within the home where they can't see the street, but instead they can see a beautiful garden or something like that. So we try to look at a more holistic view of the participant before we design the home.
Gotcha. So when are you planning to roll out robust into your portfolio?
We're currently talking with some service providers at the moment that have legacy stock that is in the robust, that are looking at transitioning their participants out. So that will bring robust into our broader market because that will be investor-led in theory. But
Gotcha.
once again, we're still approaching it from that approach of making sure the home is right for the person. So one of the homes we're looking at might have a possibility of having double fencing. One of the participants is known to throw things over fences, rubbish, balls, random things, nothing sufficient. And so we're looking at having a house where if he throws stuff over the fence, it just goes back into his own yard instead of into the next door neighbour's yards.
Yes.
And stuff like that. So we will never build and they will come for people with robust because we have such a strong belief in it needs to be quite customized to the participant. The other thing we've seen in the robust space, which we found quite interesting, and this is from me from a perspective of working in these homes, is that a lot of the homes are built extremely strong from materials that are absolutely impenetrable. But sometimes when you build a home that's absolutely impenetrable, it can actually do more damage to the participant. So if you've got a wall that is absolutely solid and a part of this person's communication sometimes if they get heightened is to headbutt a wall, if that wall has no give in it whatsoever, we can see bruising and damage done to the person. If we're building, I've seen a one SDA home where the kitchen had marble benches in it. And when the developer explained to me that it's because it's a very durable product and that it's very strong and very hard to break, the first thing I thought about was, well, if I have a participant and I'm in the way between the participant and something on the other side of the room, and they nudge me and I hit a marble bench, it's going to hurt me as a support worker. It's going to bruise my back. It's not going to wreck the property, but it might wreck me. So it's about looking at building, when it does come to property damage and the strength of the home, building a home that's really strong and resilient, but also building a home that has enough give that if a behavior happens, it's not going to damage the participant or the worker in the home.
Gotcha. I totally agree with what you say. Exactly. Are you keeping your finger on the pulse with regards to the pipeline product being built?
The pipeline
in Melbourne?
Yes. So one of the things
is there a lot of robust being built out there?
Yes, there's quite a few robust homes in Victoria being built, either by quite large developers and there's some smaller developers in the space as well. I keep my finger on the pulse more for if a participant comes across. So because we have the approach of acquisition of SDA homes, if someone comes to us and they're looking for a home in a particular area, I like to have a finger on the pulse of all homes that are coming into the market. So either ones that we might be able to manage as an SDA provider, but also ones that are being held by other SDA providers that are reputable and that we think turn out a good product. So that if a participant comes to us and goes, hey, I want to live here, or their support coordinator or the family, we want to live here, if we can't manage the property, we're quite happy to pass it on to another SDA provider that might already have a property in that area. But also, because we look at acquiring so many properties, we like to have our finger on the pulse of all properties within Australia, let alone just Victoria. But just in the robust area, there's quite a few properties happening at the moment. One of the concerning things I see about some of these properties is that there's multiple robust properties being built into one street. Sometimes you might see 6 to 10 of them being built into one street, which for me, from kind of an advocacy perspective, the idea of SDA is to kind of normalize housing for people with a disability. Let's put normal looking houses in a street between other people and build a community and build an understanding. When we put a whole bunch of people in the same street, that's not what that is. And also when you have a whole bunch of participants with robust in the same street, you have the same concerns I was talking about before with, the noise. This person's triggered by that person. They might not be in the same house, but they're next door to each other. So if you've got a participant that's going for a walk and they're quite vocal as they're walking, and they're walking past a whole bunch of other homes of people that might be triggered by those vocal behaviours, you can end up with a whole street that's not kind of right. And not, so one of my biggest concerns around robust at the moment is the amount of houses being built together next door to each other into streets. And then, that's probably my biggest concern. And then obviously some of the designs that are coming out with very little understanding of actually what the participants' needs are. That's, and that's that.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, a lot of the stakeholders in this sector, being newbie investors and newbie builders, are just rushing out there and just putting whatever product they can think is appropriate at minimum standards into some poor, low-priced land price area. I mean, I rephrase. I don't mean poor. I mean lower-priced land lots to lower the price of entry with a cheap build at minimum standards without customization and small with no space. And they're just putting it there where they can and thinking that they'll just get the participants coming in to that house where no thought has been put into the location or the design or the participant requirements to allow for them to live comfortably. And that's the problem in this sector at the moment.
One of the other biggest concerns I see around robust is that because a lot of them are built into new estates, the long-term infrastructure isn't already in the estate. So we're talking about a lot of people that live in robust homes also have challenges with transport and being transported and sitting in a vehicle. So say one of my pet hates is that I'll talk to a support coordinator and I'll say, oh, look, we're looking for a robust home. We're looking for a robust home in this area. And I'll be like, well, there's nothing in that area. And they'll say, well, what areas is there robust homes? And I'll let them know. And it could be a good 20, 30 Ks away from where they were originally talking about. But where they were originally talking about is where the participants had a long-term day service supporting them, their support workers are, their family structure is. The local Woolworths there understands them. So when they go to Woolworths to buy milk or bread or whatever they're buying, that shop understands their behaviours, and it's the anxiety of the person with the disability isn't as high because they're not having to retrain the community around them. And then we build into these new estates where for that person to access their day service, it's 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes in a car. That can lead to behaviours in itself. So quite often, we also need to think about the community and the infrastructure that is put around people. And this is not just robust, this is also, I meet a lot of high-phys participants that might have had an acquired disability. And when you talk to them, some of the stuff they say is, I'm living here, but my family's there, so I don't get to see them as much anymore. And it's just because that's where the SDA homes are being built. I'm hoping that in the future, the NDIS and the sector will slightly change and start looking more at kind of knockdown rebuilds in more sustained and more built-up areas. Because I think with SDA, we also need to think about the mental health concerns of people with a disability living in new build estates where the infrastructure isn't there.
The challenge in Victoria that I've come across, James, is a lot of builders don't want to stick to their little areas. They don't want to build in brownfield areas, they'll build in greenfield areas only because it's easy to build a lot of houses in that little estate. Yeah. So, we have a far way to go,
I totally agree with what you're saying that it's a lot easier to build into a greenfield estate. But I think that over time, we might see a market shift where people start thinking about, well, we've been around for 5 years and we've had participants in SDA for 5 years, and we're now seeing them moving out of existing homes into homes that are in those original locations where they wanted to live. And I think over time, we're going to start seeing that. We're going to see where these homes are built in estates that don't have the infrastructure that, in theory, it's not going to end up as a long-term home for someone. They're going to end up moving closer to family, moving closer to their day service, moving closer to their therapy services once that home comes available. I'm hoping that the market does a slight shift sooner than later, because I think it'll be much better for everyone.
I totally agree. And my gut feeling, James, is we'll see more of that shift towards an apartment living lifestyle. As you know, the land lots being cut up in the Western Corridor and further around the land lots of state. It's a little bit too far. 40 minutes, 50 minutes drive out from the heart of town. A lot of these people grew up in their own little suburb in the middle ring suburbs, if not inner suburbs as well. And we'll see more and more developers create lifestyle communities in high rises around the place, and participants living on their own in privacy, away from 2, 3, 4 other participants in the same house. And I think we'll get more of that flow back of participants into those ideal suburbs with more product being created, like the apartment living lifestyle. Yeah.
I think for that to happen, we need to go back to the original conversation we had about fire sprinklers and fire evacuation, because a lot of people, we're currently working on a development that's an apartment development in Victoria, and a lot of conversations I've had with people with a disability is that they're quite concerned that in an evacuation, they can't self-evacuate. And I think until we work out really good and have a really good understanding of what that's going to look like, for people that are people in apartments at the moment, even though they have high physical supports or fully accessible supports and improved livability support, at the moment, robust and apartments really do not mix. They're probably, and I want to be as politically correct as possible, but they're more able to self-advocate for themselves, and they're more able to self-evacuate and understand what that looks like, where a lot of the people we see living in housing instead of apartments have less ability to self-advocate and self-activate in relation to an evacuation. So until we work out what that's going to look like, I think that we can't really move over to that more metropolitan approach. I think we might see more duplexes on larger lots in more built-up areas, becoming more of a norm. But the apartment, I think multi-level living has still got quite a few parts of it that need to be looked at to make it more accessible for people. Sure. Yep. I was literally speaking to the head of the Country Fire Brigade and the Metropolitan Fire Brigade about SDA and apartment living at Valid last week. So Valid's a massive...
Yes.
So I was talking to them last week about this and how we work together to make sure that there's the greater understanding of what that's going to look like in an apartment setting around SDA.
Before we finish up, I want to get the answer, because you didn't answer my question earlier at the fire sprinkler topic.
Yep.
It's coming, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. 100%. 100%. From what I understand, that homes that don't even have fire sprinklers in them will have to be retrofitted.
Is that your opinion, or is that a fact?
It's, in theory, it's my opinion and my understanding that that's what they're going for.
Okay, because I raised your comment to someone else recently.
Yep.
And they said, this is a builder in Perth.
Yep.
And they said, nah, that's too hard to do. What are they? Are they going to shift everyone out of those houses to retrofit them? Where are they going to put them? The government won't be that harsh. That was their comment to me from a builder's perspective.
I don't think they've sat in the same meetings that certain other people in the sector have sat in. I believe that going forward, they will make it mandatory for SDA homes to have fire sprinklers, and they may even change what the minimum build level is. They might change it so they all have to be class 3. So, which would up fire levels and all that kind of stuff. But I also believe that the conversation is happening around existing homes having to be retrofitted with fire sprinklers, and there will be time limits put on that. And I understand what that builder's saying around, that'll be extremely hard to do. But I know of a lot of builders that have already started looking at how they're going to do that.
Wow, okay.
I've had lots of conversations with companies that we acquire properties from that have not put fire sprinklers in their homes originally. And as we are a company that only manages at the moment houses with fire sprinklers in them, we've had conversations with them about how they're going to do that in the future. And there's lots of different ways that they're talking about doing it. They're speaking to their individual fire authorities and their individual assessors and the people that implement fire sprinklers into residential buildings. So I believe that in the future it will be mandatory, and I believe, from what I understand and what I've heard and the conversations that I've had and the meetings I've sat in and conferences I've sat in, that the retrofitting of pre-existing housing will happen as well.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But didn't you say to me last time only 3 of the 4 categories will require, or you're now saying all 4 categories?
Look, robust, high fizz, and fully accessible, 100%. I think improved livability isn't really mentioned. They always say it's going to be all SDA housing, but they never have said I've never had anyone say improved livability to me, but they do say that all existing SDA housing and new SDA housing will have to have sprinklers. But no one's ever used the word improved livability. So
when you say they said, who is they? Without mentioning names, what organisations have said that?
So I've spoken to fire authorities about this. I've spoken to SDA assessors about this. I've spoken to builders about this. I've sat in on quite large conferences that have discussed SDA, but also discussed the NDIS in general, and the steering committees around certain parts of the NDIS. I've spoken to people that have sat in on stuff around the commission and have sat in the external parts of conversations there. I've seen politicians mention it. I've seen direct people from the NDIS mention it. So yeah, I think it's coming. A lot of people are talking about it.
I agree with you. I've been saying the same thing. I've been beating this drum the last 2 years. Everyone's brushing me off. But I'm glad I've recorded you saying, James said this.
Yeah. I've seen, look, I try to be straight down the line, and it's probably what I'm kind of known for. And I think it'll be a positive for the industry and the market. I understand to do it it's going to be technically quite hard for a lot of houses, and it's going to be to find, if the participants do have to move out whilst that happens and stuff like that. But even if they just made it mandatory that in the future all new SDA homes have to have sprinkler systems, I think it's a move in the right direction.
I agree.
I think we can always improve what we're doing. In 15 years' time, I'd like to look back at now and go, hey, we've really improved. We think our homes are great now, but in 15 years' time, what are these homes going to be? Like, just the changes in AT we've seen into homes over the last 5 years.
I agree.
The automation, we can constantly improve in the sector. And I think making fire sprinklers mandatory is one of those improvements.
James, as we finish up now, I would like to ask you one last question. What words of advice do you have to our 2,000 listeners who listen every month on your experiences and your advice to them if they're thinking about coming into the SDA sector as a property investor?
Do your research. I personally speak to a lot of people who are investors that want to invest in the space. And if someone comes to you and go, here's a property, buy it from the investor's perspective, go do your independent research like you would with any other home you'd be buying or any other investment you'd be buying. Because there are people in the market that design SDA homes and sell SDA homes as house and land packages, stuff like that, who have a really amazing understanding of what the market needs and what the designs need to be. And then there are also people in the market that are literally just spruikers. And as an investor, you really need to look at which person you're talking to, because one can sell you a product that is going to be tenantable, and the other one might sell you a product that's not tenantable. A lot of people selling properties in the SDA market are not SDA providers themselves. So it would be good to reach out to an SDA provider quite early in your journey and go, hey, I'm looking at doing this. Do you think this is a good location? And we're, as SDA providers, we're quite happy. We want to see positive change in the market, and we want to see homes built in the right areas. So if you ring up any SDA provider and go, hey, I'm looking at investing in this area, what do you think? Most of us are going to go, oh, that's a great idea in that area because we know of people. Or, hey, I have quite a few people that want to invest in certain areas. And I'm like, look, I know of 60 other houses that are coming into that complete region, and I think there's a capacity for maybe 10. So probably don't invest now. It's a bit late in that area. Maybe look somewhere else.
Great.
So reach out and talk to the right people, basically.
James, if anyone of our listeners want to talk to you or engage your services as an organisation to manage their property or get second opinions, how do they best contact your organisation?
They're probably best contacting me directly because even if they contact anyone else in the organisation, it'll end up with me. So
your email address, I guess?
Yeah, my email address. Do you want me to read that out? Or
yes, please.
Yeah, so my email address is James, so JAMES at Empowered Liveability, which is EMPOWERLIVEABILITY.com.au.
We will put the link to your website in the description below of this podcast for our listeners to look at your company organisation. Yeah,
no worries.
James, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your time today to talk to us about your organisation and your ethos and philosophies as an organisation about what you guys do in Victoria and around Australia as well. And we hope to invite you back in the future once the fire sprinkler becomes law.
Yes. No worries.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.